Okay, AJ, this is, I think this is number 3. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of our family in America, way before I was a little boy. My grandparents were not born in this country, and they're a long ways away from you. My grandfather's name was Stanley, and it goes like this. From Stanley, had a son named Fred. That wasn't me, that was my dad. And Fred had a daughter named Barbara. That's 3. And Barbara had a son named Jim. And Jim had a daughter named Lissa. And Lissa had a son named AJ. 6 generations away from you. And I sit in the middle, sort of, because I know you and I knew them. Well, your great-great-great-grandfather, Stanley, came from Poland with some brothers and some cousins, too. They were in Chicago and Detroit first, and then they went up into Canada. Somehow they got down in the Seattle area. Some of them did. We still have relatives in Detroit and Chicago. I used to write to a Paul. They all trace themselves back to either the same farm that we came from in outside of Krakow, or nearby farms and villages, all related in some way. Zydeks. My grandfather was, while he was born on a farm, he wasn't far from Krakow, and he left the country because he didn't want to get involved in an unjust war. A lot of Polish men left then, Polish young men. And my grandfather ended up working for a speakeasy. What was that? Well, we had prohibition in this country. You couldn't buy liquor in a tavern. You couldn't buy it in a store. You couldn't buy it anywhere. So they opened speakeasies. And they were nightclubs. And they had shows, and they served food, and they served alcoholic beverages. And they would be in places you wouldn't think. There wouldn't be a big sign out on the street that said the Tropicana, or things like Vegas we have today. You'd have to go down an alley to a back door, and there'd be something to slide open, and you spoke easy. And they would just look at you, and you better know the password, or he's not going to open that door for you. So you would speak easy so no one around you could hear the password. And you'd give the guy the password, and he would open the door, and you could go into the club. And there were things that went on upstairs at the club that you're too young to know about. When you're older, quite a bit older, ask your dad, ask Scotty about the red light districts. Well, at any rate, your grandmother, the lady he marries, also came from Europe. Steppes of Russia. Her people came from the steppes of Russia through Poland. She crossed to the United States in an ox cart. She came right through Omaha, where I live now. And she was 5 years old and traveled in an ox cart across the continent to Wilkinson, Washington. And her father's name was Stanley, just like the man she married, well, because his name is Stanley. And they're Russian Orthodox people. And they attended the Russian Orthodox Church there in the Talindas did. My grandmother was a Talinda. Your great-great-great-great-grandmother was Bertha Talinda. Hope somebody remembers to buy you a copy of the Button Box and keep it in storage till you're old enough to read it, because you're going to want to read it someday. Anyway, her brother, Al, and his brothers went to Seattle often. They were miners, and somehow the Talindas owned a mine, too. And that might have been it. The boys might have worked at the mine rather than in the mine. At any rate, they'd go into Tacoma and Seattle, prowl around in the big city, and they met Stanley at the speakeasy. And I don't know what Stanley did there. I don't know if he managed it or ran the door or was a bouncer. And they liked him. And so they said, you got to come up to Wilkinson sometime and have dinner with the family. Have a good old-fashioned Polish dinner. Because he was, eating in restaurants in Seattle, and there weren't very many Polish restaurants there. So he was doing well. He had a car, such as cars were in those days. And he took it, and he went to Wilkinson on a Sunday, or a Saturday, I guess, a Saturday afternoon. Had to have dinner with the family. And then to go to a tavern in Wilkinson and drink with the DeLinda boys, play pool. And when they got to Wilkinson, he saw a girl walking on the streets, because this is many years later, 15, 16 years after my grandma gets there. 17 maybe, I've forgotten how old. They were young. And he sees her walking on the street, and he says to Al, to Linda, you see that girl across the street over there? That's the girl I want to marry. Right there, that one. And Al said, like hell. That's my sister. You don't go near her. And they wandered around town, and they were in the store at the same time Bertha was, and she was picking up things like flour and salt and things that they needed at the house. Not much money. They didn't splurge. Her dad wasn't a good provider. Lots in the book about that. And she was looking at a box of Whitman chocolates that came in a metal box in those days with a design on it, very pretty brass boxes to help sell, because they bought the chocolates and then you had a box to store things in. But it was more money than she had to spend, and she put it back, and Stanley saw her handling it, so he was introduced to her by Al, and he told his sister that he was coming to dinner. And when he came to dinner, he brought her that box of Whitman sampler chocolates. And Grandma kept it all her life. She used it to store buttons in her sewing room. And I have it now. In fact, it's on the cover of the book, The Button. That's why we call it the button box. And Grandma didn't like him. She thought he was a city slicker. She thought he was slippery and a little bit pushy, and she didn't like him. But he came back with the weekend for dinner again, and brought her flowers or something, and there was going to be a dance the next week up at the Finn Hall. And she had just made herself a new dress, and he wanted to know if she'd like to go to the dance. And she wanted to go to the dance. She loved to dance, and she didn't really want to go with any of the boys in Wilkinson that she knew, and none had asked her yet anyway. And he did have a car, and she did want to show off that new dress. And so she went to the dance with him. And, of course, she fell in love with him, and they got married. And a lot of things went on. They lived in Seattle, had 3 kids in Seattle. They ended up with a beautiful farm in Buckley, Washington. Wonderful farm. Everything the heart could desire was on that farm. And in that little town. So, I just wanted you to know that had it not been for the fact that 2 people moved to this country from Poland, you wouldn't be here. And of course, you're just multicultural. You're better than Heinz, which is supposed to have 57 different varieties of tomato in it or something. I don't know, Heinz 57, what is that all about? But you've got this wonderful Polish strand in you. I hope your mother learns to make Polish food, because who is Barbara? Barbara's your grandmother, your great-grandmother. Barbara's your great-grandmother. Oh, my Lord. Well, if we're all getting old, your dad's 49, going to be 50 next year, and your grandpa, Jim. There was a slip of the tongue. Anyway, just wanted you to know you have this Polish strand that almost didn't happen because my grandpa was a city slicker. My grandma, she got him under control. And he was tall, well, he wasn't tall, but he's taller than her. Good looking. They were both good looking. But, it was one of those marriages where she got her way, where she'd leave. And she turned him into a pretty decent citizen with some minor exceptions. And when you get older, you'll read the book.